Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome into this session of Exploring the Siddur. My name is Rabbi Levy. I am your humble host for these sessions as we take a deeper dive into the prayer book. It's been a couple weeks since our last session. If you haven't watched the other ones, I would encourage you to do so. They're on our congregation Kol Ami YouTube page. You can probably find the recordings on our website as well. And just to give a little bit of an overview of why we're here, what we're doing, the purpose of this 5 or 6 session long stream study session, however you want to conceive of it, whatever it is that we're doing here, learning, singing, all of the beautiful things, is intended to give us a little bit of a better understanding of the prayer book. The prayer book being probably the Jewish book people most often use. We often talk about the Torah or the Hebrew Bible as sort of our really, really important text, which is very much true. But realistically, every time you go to services, every time you make Shabbat at home, you're using a prayer book, and yet we don't often take a lot of time to study it. So that's what we're doing today. For today's session, I would encourage you to find the link to our study sheet, which includes some texts, some of the songs that we'll be singing, and that way you'll be able to follow along. Also, I included the link on the PDF of the download sheet for the electronic version of Mishkan Tefillah, which is available online with the CCAR Press. And throughout the sessions, you'll see both today and from the previous sessions, I include the page numbers for the various prayers and texts that we will be talking about. So, today, we will be talking about the Shema and its blessings. Yes. In Hebrew, Shema uvirchoteha, literally the Shema and its blessings. And this is another rubric, to use the fancy term that Larry Hoffman was so kind enough to give to us. Another rubric, another building block of the service. And again, we're looking primarily at the morning weekday service. It's a good place to start because it has the most full liturgy. Now, if you get to an evening service, there are certain things that are going to be a little bit different, and certainly on Shabbat and holidays, there are going to be other things that are different. But this is where we're starting out. And if you take a look at page 1 of your class sheet, you will see that I laid out all the different rubrics, this graphic here that comes from my People's Prayer Book. And it shows sort of the trajectory of a morning service. And I should also note that it is intentional the way it proceeds up. The idea being that as you move from Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings, through Pesukei de Zimra, through the Amidah, you reach sort of the pinnacle of a weekday morning service, and specifically the weekday morning services on Mondays and Thursdays, which include the reading of Torah. And this is seen as sort of the high point of the service. Now, if you weren't reading Torah, the high point really would be the Amidah. That is really the central focal point of the service if there's not a Torah reading. And today we're going to be talking about the Shema and its blessings, which is its own rubric, its own section of the service. So oftentimes as you move from Pesukei de Zimra, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, into the Shema and its blessings, which begins with the Baruch Hu, you will often hear in many different prayer spaces a Kaddish being recited as a way of Kaddish being obviously our prayer of mourning, the mourner's Kaddish, but there's actually many different types of Kaddish, and it more generally is understood as a prayer, a text meant to distinguish between one thing and another. It's sort of like a place marker, if you will. And then we move into the Shema and its blessings. So I have the handy dandy arrow. We are here. So if we move into the second page, we see I included this passage from the Mishnah being our earliest rabbinic text, sort of laying out what would eventually become the Judaism that we know and practice today. For those who are curious to learn more about the Mishnah, you can check out my Who Knows 6 class starting in January, and I'll be getting into the Mishnah. It's a very, very important text and something that too often people don't really know that much about. So that's an aside, a little shameless self-promotion. And here we read, in the morning recitation of the Shema, one recites 2 blessings before and 1 after. In the evening recitation of the Shema, one recites 2 blessings before and 2 after. Now, when it says morning recitation of the Shema and evening recitation of the Shema, that's a practice that actually comes from the text of the Shema. Now, when we say Shema, as is noted here, we're talking about what we refer to now as the Shema, being the 2 lines, as well as what we refer to generally as the Ve'ahavta, as well as a couple of other paragraphs that have largely been taken out of Reform prayer. We'll be getting into that a little bit later. We won't quite have time to dive into it as much as maybe I would like, but that could be another good opportunity for a further web series. So when it says the morning recitation and evening recitation, that does come from what we refer to as the Ve'ahavta from this passage in Deuteronomy. If you see Deuteronomy 6:4-9, that is the Ve'ahavta. And it talks about reciting it when you lie down and when you rise up. V'shochvecha uvkumecha. And that's where we get this idea that you recite these passages, literally take these words and recite them in the morning and in the evening. And this is really actually where the Mishnah starts, which is what time in the evening can you say the Shema, and going into all of those practical details. But here we learn that there are 2 blessings before and 1 after in the morning. And we know, just as a little bit of historical context, we know that the prayers as we have them, the blessings as we have them, were not fixed until a little bit later, certainly much later than when the Mishnah was written. Depending on what community you were in, they might have different language for certain prayers. And that even continued into the Middle Ages. Most of them were codified and solidified, but oftentimes they would be appended to, they would be added on to. A lot of different things would happen. And then certainly with the invention of the printing press, that really solidified the language of certain prayers. But in the ancient times, in the late antiquity, when Rabbinic Judaism was just getting going, you might have a fixed, what we call chatimah, the part at the end of a blessing or a prayer that just simply ends with Baruch Atah Adonai, fill in the blank here. That was usually fixed, but the stuff before then oftentimes was a little bit loose and based off of the custom of the community, the poetic creativity of whoever was leading prayer or whoever was writing new liturgical poems at the time. We do know it was very loose. So when they say 2 blessings before and 1 after, we know that the blessings before might have looked a little bit different from them, but we still maintain the same structure. So what are these blessings before? If you look at this handy dandy chart, you'll see that the first blessing has to do with creation. Yotzer. So in the morning, this is Yotzer Or. In the evening, it is, giving you a second to answer. In the evening, it is Ma'ariv Aravim. Both of these blessings have to do with the act of creation. God controlling the natural world, God creating the universe, all of those things. And so in the morning, Yotzer Or is referring to God as the one who fashions light, the creator of heavenly lights, the light that brings existence. And it makes sense as a morning blessing that we're talking about light, the sun is coming up. And then in the evening, Ma'ariv Aravim is all about turning day into night, light and dark, the balance between the two. And And so it's very timely. Our prayer service, while fixed in a lot of ways, shifts according to the times, tides, and seasons of the year. So depending on what season, you might have different language, and certainly depending on what time of day, you'll likely have a different prayer or blessing, whatever it may be. And then the second, before I get to that, this is actually starting to, if you notice at the top, I say building a narrative and the love sandwich. We'll get to the love sandwich here in a second. But this section of the service actually is creating or operating according to a narrative. It's the narrative of creation, the creation of the world, cosmological creation, where the book of Bereshit of Genesis begins, revelation, which is the revelation of the Torah to the people of Israel through Moses, which of course we read about in Exodus, but really throughout Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, sort of throughout the rest of the Torah. And then redemption, which is this period at the end of historical time, what we refer to as the Messianic age, when war will no longer exist and humanity will live in peace, and all of the beautiful visions that we have of what the world would be like without all the strife and hardship that we face nowadays. And so creation, revelation, redemption. And this is really a core theme, a core narrative arc when we think about the way Jews approach time and history. I don't want to get too deep into it. We don't have too much time. But here we see this trajectory of history, that the world was created, revelation happened, creating this special bond between God and the Jewish people, or the people of Israel, and then redemption at the end of time. And here we see it baked into the service. And so the worship service, isn't just a collection of various texts and prayers. It's actually, and a lot of times, telling a story. When we talked about Bir Chod HaShachar, I talked about how it's gradually building up identity. It's moving from the immensely personal out to the universal, or in certain cases, the universal into the personal. And so too here with the Shema and its blessings. So the second blessing before the Shema is revelation. We will be talking about that. In the morning, that's Ahava Rabbah. And in the evening, that is Ahavat Olam. We'll be getting to that. And then we have the Shema, which is 3 biblical passages. And then the third blessing, which is all about redemption. So creation, revelation, redemption. And the third blessing is where we get Mi Chamocha. So if we begin with creation, we have the Yotzer Or blessing. And Laura Berkson wrote this beautiful melody that can be used as a round. We do this actually during our Shabbat awakening services. And so I wanted to bring this as a way of singing together, celebrating together the lights of creation. Nowadays, we understand that light and energy and matter are all interconnected. And so I think there's this unique relationship that we have with light. Particularly scientifically, knowing light as the source of life, through warmth and through photosynthesis, and light being pure energy, and at the same time recognizing the beginning of a new day, the various metaphors we use in terms of light. So hope you'll sing along with me. I'll sing it through a couple times. I can't exactly do the round on my own, but wherever you are, I hope that you sing along with me and we can celebrate the light of a brand new day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzei or vorei choshech osei shalom uvorei et hakol. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzei יוצא אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם. יוצא אור ובורא חושך, עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who creates light and darkness, Yotzer or Vurei Choshech, who makes peace and creates all things, Oseh Shalom Uvorei et Hakol. And I wanted to bring this poem that I found was written sort of as an iyun, as an intention for the Yotzer or blessing that we recite in this section of the service each morning. And Henry Rassoff writes, "The light that is every day, what is it really? Its true nature. There is light from the sun, the moon, from stars, comets, and meteors, lightning, auroras, and solar flares, rainbows, sprites, and of course sunsets and sunrises. From lanternfish at the bottom of the sea, an eerie green light, glowworms, fireflies, and some mushrooms. Light reflected from between the eyes of spiders, so we can see them in the dark. Phosphorescent diadems that sparkle in the waves and sand during red tides. Rocks that glow green and purple in the dark. Watch dials, television sets, flashlights, fiber optic cables, cell phones, and computers. There is also light in the eyes of children, lovers' eyes. The unbearable lightness of being. And let us not forget spiritual lights, the guiding light of wisdom, light around the body, auras, enlightenment, the clear light. And who can forget the Zohar, the book of radiance? But however much we learn from science, literature, philosophy, or personal experience about the light we see and the light concealed in the places we do not see, however much we read, meditate, or experiment, however much we think we know, light is still a mystery. For we really do not know the beauty of sight, the existence of light in all its varieties is a mystery, pure and simple, beyond understanding. All we can do is be grateful for this bounty and our ability to perceive and distinguish it." And I think that last stanza, all we can do is be grateful, is a perfect encapsulation of what it means to recite a blessing. We say, "Blessed are you, sovereign our God, the creator of lights." It's an offering of gratitude. As I mentioned a couple sessions ago, the difference between a blessing and a prayer is blessing is saying thank you, prayer is saying please. So most of the time we're reciting a lot of blessings. We're offering a lot of gratitude. We're bringing a lot of gratitude into the world and recognizing the amazingness, the amazing nature. I don't think amazingness is a word, but the amazing nature of the world that we live in, the fact that we get to wake up each day. Part of the Yotzer or blessing is this teaching that the world is renewed again each day. So we move from creation later into the middle part of our narrative, revelation. And here I have the English translation from Ahava Rabbah, blessing, "How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with abounding compassion. On account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah." So here we have, I mentioned the love sandwich before. So this blessing has to do with revelation, has to do with the granting of the Torah. these sacred teachings to the people of Israel. And more generally, the sharing of wisdom from the divine to humanity. And it also recognizes this act as a sign of love, as an act of love between the Creator and God's creation. And so this is actually the first part of our love sandwich. The love sandwich actually encompasses the one line of the Shema, which we'll get to here in a second, because you have Ahava Rabbah, or in the evening, Ahavat Olam, talking about this endless love that God has for God's creations. And then in the middle, you have the Shema. And then after that, you have Ve'ahavta. You shall love Adonai. You shall love the eternal your God. And it's this idea that there's this love radiating down, to use the light metaphors, radiating down on us, and then the way that we express our love in return, and sort of in a reciprocal relationship, is in the way that we act, in the way that we live our lives and affirm the dignity of human beings. We protect the sanctity of our world, all of these many things where we take these teachings, this act of love, and ingrain it within ourselves and live it out, and embody these metaphors in the way that we live our lives. So we're going to go ahead and sing this version of Ahava Rabbah by Alana Arian and Noah Aronson. It's a beautiful, beautiful melody, and I hope wherever you are, you'll enjoy it. Sing along once you get the hang of it, and we'll celebrate a little bit of love, unconditional love, this morning. Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahava Rabbah, Ahavtanu, Ahavtanu. And I'll conclude with the blessing, the Chatimah, that we say right before we recite the Shema. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher ba'amo Yisrael ba'ahava. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who chooses the people Israel in love. As we approach the Shema, this central point of our service, even if it's not quite central in terms of the larger trajectory, it's central in terms of our affirmation of the oneness of God. It was often referred to as the watchword of our faith. And to use Larry Hoffman's term, it's considered the creed. This is sort of what many people view as the core essence of what it is to be Jewish, which is affirming the oneness of God and affirming this unique relationship between God and the Jewish people. And so for this Shema, what I want to encourage everyone to do is to take a deep, deep breath, and with the end of each word, to exhaust that breath, to use one breath for each time as a way of bringing a little bit more intentionality to the Shema as we recite it for our morning recitation. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Ve'olam Va'id. Continue with the Ve'ahavta. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בהם בשבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי הייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Then many people add Adonai Elohechem Emet. So we've gone through our love sandwich, Ahava Rabbah or Ahavat Olam in the evening, the Shema line, and then Ve'ahavta. And that's the love sandwich, this reciprocal love of God's goodness and love in creating the world and establishing this unique relationship with humanity. And our response to that in the way that we live, in the way that we take the teachings of our ancestors and the love of our community into our daily lives. As a quick note, I'm mindful of our time and we're running a little low on it. A lot to go over in one session. You'll notice that this version, which is the typical, I would say, Reform version of the Ve'ahavta, of the Shema in total, is, if you look back at the chart that I laid out that Larry Hoffman was so kind to give us, you'll notice that there are a couple paragraphs missing. We don't have time to go into it here, but I would encourage folks to go and look up those verses and to think yourself, if you want to leave some comments in the comment section after you go back and do this, come back to us and think about why Reformed Jews early on might not have wanted to include these paragraphs, even though traditionally they are included. And this also speaks to the prayer book as being a representation of a community's values. So when we look at different prayer books from different movements, different communities, different forms of Jewish culture, you'll see changes. And the prayer book is a way of expressing sort of who you are. So finally, we reach redemption, sort of the end of time, this messianic hope for freedom, and it's also tied in with the redemption from Egypt. So there's so many different ways to understand this narrative arc of creation, revelation, redemption. And I included the Micha Mocha here. We won't have time to sing it, unfortunately. But I think this is a beautiful reading from Mishkan Tefillah. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai, that wherever we are, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. So we see this narrative arc from creation to revelation to redemption. It encapsulates so many different elements of our daily lives. There's the larger historical version. There's the daily version of the world being created anew each day, finding those moments of revelation in each day, and also thinking about the redemption that we can be a part of, the redemption that we've enjoyed, the freedoms that we enjoyed. I could go on for days about this stuff, but I'm a little bit over our time. Thank you so much for joining me today as we explored the Shema and its blessings. I hope that it was fulfilling. I hope that it was meaningful. If you didn't get a chance, please go check out the other videos that I've posted. We're just moving through the service, and I hope that you all have a blessed day, and that you find those moments of gratitude and intentionality as we move through the day and up to the end of the week into Shabbat. Bye now. See you next time.